Chapter 7. Truth is the most valuable thing we have. Let us economize it. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. From diary, for a day or two we have been plowing among an invisible vast wilderness of islands, catching now and then a shadowy glimpse of a member of it. There does seem to be a prodigious lot of islands this year. The map of this region is freckled and fly-specked all over with them. Their number would seem to be uncountable. We are moving among the Fijis now, 224 islands and islets in the group. In front of us, to the west, the wilderness stretches toward Australia, then curves upward to New Guinea, and still up and up to Japan. Behind us, to the east, the wilderness stretches 60 degrees across the waste of the Pacific. South of us is New Zealand. Somewhere or other among these myriads, Samoa is concealed and not discoverable on the map. Still, if you wish to go there, you will have no trouble about finding it if you follow the directions given by Robert Louis Stevenson to Dr. Conan Doyle and to Mr. J.M. Barrie. You go to America, across the continent to San Francisco, and then it's the second turning to the left. To get the full flavor of the joke, one must take a glance at the map. Wednesday, September 11th. Yesterday we passed close to an island or so and recognized the published Fiji characteristics. A broad belt of clean white coral sand around the island. Back of it, a graceful fringe of leaning palms with native huts nestling cozily among the shrubbery at their bases. Back of these, a stretch of level land clothed in tropic vegetation. Back of that, rugged and picturesque mountains. A detail of the immediate foreground, a moldering ship perched high up on a reef bench. This completes the composition and makes the picture artistically perfect. In the afternoon, we sighted Suva, capital of the group, and threaded our way into the secluded little harbor, a placid basin of brilliant blue and green water tucked snugly in among the sheltering hills. A few ships rode at anchor in it, one of them a sailing vessel flying the American flag, and they said she came from Duluth. There's a journey. Duluth is several thousand miles from the sea, and yet she is entitled to the proud name of Mistress of the Commercial Marine of the United States of America. There is only one free, independent, unsubsidized American ship sailing the foreign seas, and Duluth owns it. All by itself, that ship is the American fleet. All by itself, it causes the American name and power to be respected in the far regions of the globe. All by itself, it certifies to the world that the most populous civilized nation in the earth has a just pride in her stupendous stretch of seafront, and is determined to assert and maintain her rightful place as one of the great maritime powers of the planet. All by itself, it is making foreign eyes familiar with a flag which they have not seen before for 40 years outside of the museum. For what Duluth has done in building, equipping, and maintaining at her sole expense the American foreign commercial fleet, and in thus rescuing the American name from shame and lifting it high for the homage of the nations, we owe her a debt of gratitude which our hearts shall confess with quickened beats whenever her name is named henceforth. Many national toasts will die in the lapse of time. But while the flag flies and the Republic survives, they who live under their shelter will still drink this one, standing and uncovered. Health and prosperity to thee, O Duluth, American Queen of the alien seas. Rowboats began to flock from the shore. Their crews were the first natives we'd seen. These men carried no overplus of clothing, and this was wise, for the weather was hot. Handsome, great, dusky men they were, muscular, clean-limbed, and with faces full of character and intelligence. It would be hard to find their superiors anywhere among the dark races, I should think. Everybody went ashore to look around and spy out the land and have that luxury of luxuries, to sea voyagers, a land dinner. And there we saw more natives, wrinkled old women with their flat mammals flung over their shoulders, or hanging down in front like the cold-weather drip of a molasses faucet. Plump and smiley young girls, blithe and content, easy and graceful, a pleasure to look at. Young matrons, tall, straight, comely, nobly built, sweeping by with chin up and a gait incomparable for unconscious stateliness and dignity. Majestic young men, athletes for build and muscle, clothed in a loose arrangement of dazzling white, with bronze breast and bronze legs naked, and the head of a cannon swab of solid hair combed straight out from the skull and dyed a rich brick red. Only 60 years ago they were sunk in darkness. Now they have the bicycle. We strolled about the streets of the white folks' little town and around over the hills by paths and roads among European dwellings and gardens and plantations, and past clumps of hibiscus that make a body blink. The great blossoms were so intensely red, and by we stopped to ask an elderly English colonist a question or two, and to sympathize with him concerning the torrid weather. But he was surprised and said, This is not hot. You ought to be here in the summertime once." We supposed that this was summer. It has the year marks of it. You could take it to almost any country and deceive people with it. But if it isn't summer, what does it lack? It lacks half a year. This is midwinter. I had been suffering from colds for several months, and a sudden change of season like this could hardly fail to do me hurt. It brought on another cold. It is odd, these sudden jumps from season to season. A fortnight ago we left America in midsummer. Now it is midwinter. About a week hence we shall arrive in Australia in the spring. After dinner I found in the billiard room a resident whom I had known somewhere else in the world, and presently made some new friends and drove with them out into the country to visit His Excellency, the head of the state, who was occupying his country residence, to escape the rigors of the winter weather, I suppose, for it was on breezy high ground and much more comfortable than the lower regions where the town is, and where the winter has full swing and often sets a person's hair afire when he takes off his hat to bow. There is a noble and beautiful view of ocean and islands and castellated peaks from the governor's high-placed house, and its immediate surroundings lie drowsing in that dreamy repose and serenity, which are the charm of life in the Pacific Islands. One of the new friends who went out there with me was a large man, and I had been admiring his size all the way. I was still admiring it as he stood by the governor on the veranda, talking. Then the Fijian butler stepped out there to announce tea and dwarfed him. Maybe he did not quite dwarf him, but at any rate the contrast was quite striking. Perhaps that dark giant was a king in a condition of political suspension. I think that in the talk there on the veranda it was said that in Fiji, as in the Sandwich Islands, native kings and chiefs are of much grander size and build than the commoners. This man was clothed in flowing white vestments, and they were just the thing for him. They comported well with his great stature and his kingly port and dignity. European clothes would have degraded him, made him commonplace. I know that because they do that with everybody that wears them. It was said that the old-time devotion to chiefs and reverence for their persons still survive in the native commoner and in great force. The educated young gentleman who is chief of the tribe that live in the region about the capital dresses in the fashion of high-class European gentlemen, but even his clothes cannot damn him in the reverence of his people. Their pride in his lofty rank and ancient lineage lives on, in spite of his lost authority and the evil magic of his tailor. He has no need to defile himself with work or trouble his heart with the sordid cares of life. The tribe will see to it that he shall not want, and that he shall hold up his head and live like a gentleman. I had a glimpse of him down in the town. Perhaps he's a descendant of the last king, the king with the difficult name, whose memory is preserved by a notable monument of cut stone, which one sees in the enclosure in the middle of the town. Thakomban, I remember now, that is his name. It is easier to preserve it on a granite block than in your head. Fiji was ceded to England by this king in 1858. One of the gentlemen present at the governor's quoted remark made by the king at the time of the session, a neat retort and with a touch of pathos in it, too. The English commissioner had offered a crumb of comfort to Thakombau by saying that the transfer of the kingdom to Great Britain was merely a sort of hermit crab formality, you know. Yes, said poor Thakombau, but with this difference. The crab moves into an unoccupied shell, but mine isn't. However, as far as I can make out from the books, the king was between the devil and the deep sea at the time and hadn't much choice. He owed the United States a large debt, a debt which he could pay if allowed time, but time was denied him. He must pay up right away, or the warships would be upon him. To protect his people from this disaster, he ceded his country to Britain, with a clause in the contract providing for the ultimate payment of the American debt. In old times, the Fijians were fierce fighters. They were very religious and worshipped idols. The big chiefs were proud and haughty, and they were men of great style in many ways. All chiefs had several wives. The biggest chiefs sometimes had as many as 50. When a chief was dead and ready for burial, 4 or 5 of his wives were strangled and put into the grave with him. In 1804, 27 British convicts escaped from Australia to Fiji and brought guns and ammunition with them. Consider what a power they were armed like that, and what an opportunity they had. If they'd been more energetic men and sober, and had had brains and know how to use them, they could have achieved the sovereignty of the archipelago. 27 kings, and each with 8 or 9 islands under his scepter. But nothing came of this chance. They lived worthless lives of sin and luxury, and died without honor, in most cases by violence. Only one of them had any ambition. He was an Irishman named Connor. He tried to raise a family of 50 children, scored 48. He died lamenting his failure. It was a foolish sort of avarice. Many a father would have been rich enough with 40. It is a fine race, the Fijians, with brains in their heads and an inquiring turn of mind. It appears that their savage ancestors had a doctrine of immortality in their scheme of religion, with limitations. That is to say, their dead friends would go to a happy hereafter if it could be accumulated, but not otherwise. They drew the line. They thought that the missionaries' doctrine was too sweeping, too comprehensive. They called attention to certain facts. For instance, many of their friends had been devoured by sharks. The sharks, in their turn, were caught and eaten by other men. Later, these men were captured in war and eaten by the enemy. The original persons had entered into the composition of the sharks. Next, they and the sharks had become part of the flesh and blood and bone of the cannibals. How then could the particles of the original men be searched out from the final conglomerate and put together again? The inquirers were full of doubts, and considered that the missionary had not examined the matter with the gravity and attention which so serious a thing deserved. The missionary taught these exacting savages many valuable things, and got from them one, a very dainty and poetical idea. Those wild and ignorant poor children of nature believe that the flowers, after they perish, rise on the winds and float away to the fair fields of heaven, and flourish there forever in immortal beauty.